So for this recipe, I'm using Le Verde olives, which are an olive that's marinated with herbs and wild garlic, and they're perfect for a Mediterranean twist on mussels. Obviously, being here in Cornwall, Cornish mussels are great. They're organic and rope grown, so a really sustainable source of shellfish. What I'm going to do is pair it with something a little more unusual than moules marinières and the double cream route, and go for pancetta and a little bit of cider with some heritage tomatoes and lots of other bits and bobs. So first of all, obviously you can do this inside. Heat up your pan and add a drizzle of oil. And this is just going to be to soften the pancetta. I put on a pinch of paprika and a little bit of saffron as well. So in that goes. That's going to provide really sort of the surf and turf flavour. I've also got some red onion. I find that red onion works really well with this just because of its natural sweetness, and also just colour complements the bright heritage tomatoes. Roughly chop that. There it goes. And the second one. I'm going to put the olives in rather late in the cooking process, but they do fry obviously very well as well. But I just quite want them to be the sort of pop of juicy, briny flavour that seasons the dish. Lovely smell of bacon or pancetta, onion, a little bit of garlic next. When wild garlic's in season, you could just use some extra bits of that, but the olives again have got a nice garlic allium flavour to them. So that's looking good. You want your bacon to really caramelise. It provides umami depth to this dish. So it's that burnt bacon or anchovy back note that is so important when you're building flavours. In these go. So we've got garlic, onion, pancetta. Next up, I'm going to work on the tomatoes, which I want to almost turn into a rich, sort of sticky tomato sauce. Or a broth, so I'm going to keep them quite coarse. You could just use a tin of chopped tomatoes, but that would be cheating because it's summer. So, oh dear, that one was alive. So tomatoes in, and this also takes the heat out of the pan a bit. They'll release a lot of moisture. Smelling wonderful. I've also decided to use green peppercorns because I can, and because I find them really, really lovely with Le Verde olives. It's still a peppery warmth, but it's slightly more aromatic. Goes very nicely with this bacon. Tends to be the peppercorn I use when I'm doing peppercorn sauces and things as well. So, last couple of tomatoes in. The mussels I've obviously been keeping on ice in the fridge, and I've just picked through them, debearded them, which means taking off any little bits from the outside of the shell. And I had to get rid of one or two that were open and didn't close when I rattled them in the sink. So that I'm going to give a couple of seconds to work its magic. I've got some broad beans that I've picked, again, really lovely summer vegetable. I've shelled them and got rid of their little sort of slightly more bitter outer casing, but you could cook them whole. For me, a broad bean like that is one of the most wonderful flavoured things to cook with, and it only needs a couple of seconds right at the end. So we're going to add that along with the olives and some basil. Next up, cider and the mussels. So the way to cook this is obviously with that little drizzle of oil. I've also got some herb butter because frankly you can never have enough butter. In it goes. We're going to let that melt and then take these gorgeous local mussels and cider. I'm going to season it obviously with no salt because the pancetta is salty enough, and the Le Verde olives basically provide that seasoning for me. So that butter is going to provide a real richness to this whole dish. I'll let that come back up to the sizzle. Meanwhile, try an olive. And get the peppercorns. Green peppercorns, about a tablespoon, which sounds a lot, but it can really handle it. So in there, just beautiful green peppercorn. Again, you can just use black, or there we go, we've got some sizzle. This is a Kotlich, this type of cooking pan. It's an old Hungarian cooking stove. It tends to be my go-to beach tripod way of cooking any sort of shellfish on the beach, or just vegetable stews in the garden. Okay, let's go for it. So, mussels in. Cider, just to steam them. Keep the rest for me for later. Lid on. Oh, actually a stir first. And these are going to cook in just a matter of moments. Just lower this down. It's right over the coals. And while that is doing its thing, I'm just going to season the broad beans and basil, making sure it's ready to go in. Got my olives ready. I've got a couple of minutes to wait. I'm going to give you a couple of twists on this recipe that you could try. Olives and mussels work really, really well. It's that sort of classic combination of shellfish, almost like a paella, as you could say. But in this instance, you could go down the route of still going for a creamy sauce if you wanted. Le Verde would work very well as a sort of a substitute for just shallot and herbs, along with that double cream and garlic. So they do work really well in mussel dishes because they're juicy and plump, and they take on all of that sauce and capture it. So you've got a lovely way of eating. Serve this with some sourdough bread on the side. Let the mussels cook for a couple more minutes, and then we're going to get all of these olives and broad beans in the same pan, and that's it. This is how to cook moule Cornish olive recipe in the sunshine. Hope you enjoy it, and don't be shy of trying your own version. Olives in just as the mussels are starting to open, along with lots of fresh basil and broad beans.